Mongolia, from my research, had a very complex history, and most people know only one thing is Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. But many people are clueless of what happened after that.
I myself, I would identify as the worst articulator of Mongolian history, but to just give the general picture of Mongolian history, what happened after the Mongol Empire and Genghis Khan rule. So after the Mongol Empire was dissolved into these chiefdoms, and there was the era of the Golden Horde. And around 16th century, Mongolia was ruled under the Manchu for over 300 years. And after that, with the help of Soviets, we got our independence from the Manchu rulers. And right after getting our independence, we actually went autonomous from the Soviet Union. And for 70 years, there was a Soviet rule, Soviet regime. We were like propagated with the socialist ideas. And after that 70 years, the 1990s came and we had the democratic revolution. And since 1992, exactly, now we are here having our own democratic history and trying to keep up with the globalization and all these modern developments.
It seems that it's a little bit tough because you're quite landlocked between two countries. Up north, you have the Russian Federation, and down south, there's the People's Republic of China. So there's a small land bridge, like 26 miles to the west, that you almost have a border with Kazakhstan, but I think it's still the land of area is still China, so to say. So I'm pretty sure that you have experienced quite a lot of difficulties in terms of developments because you have these two neighbors and also you don't have access to the sea. So how much is modern day Mongolia dependent on their neighbors, on the Russian Federation and on People's Republic of China?
Yes, geographically, Mongolia is in quite complicated location. Like in every international news, reporters define Mongolia as sandwiched between Russia and China, between these two big economies. And today, Mongolia is materially heavily dependent from China. We import, I think maybe around 90% of the goods from China. And but on the other hand, culturally, we are more influenced, and there are a lot of Russian legacy in Mongolian culture. So if you visit Mongolia and go around the city, Mongolia is like the old buildings, and some streets are very much similar to old Soviet districts and old Soviet streets. So it's kind of like infused with the Russian old Soviet culture, but we are culturally very infused with a lot of different things. We kind of try to be very distant from any kind of Chinese influence, because that was how our last 100 years of cultural shaping was made with the Soviet propaganda. Because during that Soviet rule, everything was thought that China was bad influence, and there was this national identity program that thought that we need to be pure in terms of our blood, and everything bad and everything contaminating came from China. So we still have those kind of mindset that we think we try to be kind of culturally separate from China. But actually, if you look back into China, look into the history, there's a lot of like intermingling with the Chinese culture and everything all together.
Probably that's also one of the reasons why in the early 20th century you have adopted the Cyrillic script, So many people might not know, but in Mongolia, you had your own traditional script, which is actually written from top to bottom
Mm-hmm.
and from left to right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mainly going something resembling, if some people have seen Chinese writing with the Chinese hieroglyphs. It's not hieroglyphs; it's an alphabet,
Mm-hmm.
Mongolian alphabet, but it's also written top to bottom, which looks very pretty. It's a very beautiful script. And from what I know, you have moved away from the script to the Cyrillic, probably during the Soviet
Mm-hmm.
times when Mongolia became a communist country. And I do understand that you have a very complex relationship with China, just like as Lithuanians have a complex relationship with the Russian Federation, because our country was also added to the Russian Empire in 1795. So we also lived under the Russian Empire for around 200 years. And then there was the Soviet era, so we didn't want to become a Soviet regime. We also declared independence in the middle 20th century, but then we were taken by the Soviets, then by the Nazis, then again by the Soviets. And only in 1990, just like Mongolia, we declared permanent independence that we have until now. So we saw the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union as oppressors,
Mm-hmm.
and we still see that until this day. But you saw it as liberators
Mm-hmm.
because they helped you
Yeah.
to get rid of the Chinese rule.
Mm.
So I just wondered, how do people in modern day Mongolia see the Russian Federation?
So what you just actually said about Mongolian relationship with the Russian Federation was very accurate. So people think, Mongolians think as Russians as our liberator from Chinese rule and Chinese oppression, and but actually there was also Russian oppression, but it was displayed as a liberation,
Mm.
and a lot of people see that now as it was not a liberation actually, but there this kind of old mindset of, for example, my parents still see Russians as our brothers, and they're very fond of Russian culture because they studied in Irkutsk and Leningrad, etc. They have they learned Russian language when they were students. So there are this part of generations that are still feel very close and very patronized by Russians, but also there are, of course, there are people who are seeing what the current affairs of Russian politics and what's happening in the world. So they try to make people see that Russians are not very innocent as they seem to for Mongolians. So there are, of course, there are conflicts.
Yeah, the Russian relationship with Asia and Europe is always complicated because it's such a large country and it became large, well, by conquering lands. So most of Asian part of China didn't just say like, "Hey, we want to become part of the Russian Empire." It was not like that, and the mentality is probably similar to this day and age. But moving from that back to Mongolia, uh, I know that during the Soviet times, the religious aspect of the country changed dramatically. Could you talk a little bit about the traditional religions of Mongolia and what happened during the Soviet times?
Mm-hmm. So Mongolian local religious belief is shamanism, yes, that's true, and also the worship of the sky. Those were the authentic religions and spiritual beliefs during the Genghis Khan and also before that. And um, during the 16th century, there was the Buddhism came to Mongolia from Tibet, and it stayed and also became very much embedded in our daily life and culture and traditions until the rule of Soviet regime. And when the Russian Soviet regime took over Mongolia, they repressed especially the religion, and what they made us believe was our own nomadic culture, and religion and everything was barbaric and not cultured. So they started the cultural revolution, which was thought that the religion was not good, and all of our traditional culture was repressed. Even the Genghis Khan's name was prohibited to say out loud, etc. So during that time, most of the intellectuals were the monks and high-level lamas in the Buddhist Buddhist temples. But during the Soviet regime, all those religious intellectuals were persecuted, and they were killed. And so we lost a lot of historical, religious, cultural facts, artifacts, temples, and also people to the Russian oppression. And after that, after losing all those traditional identity, we actually had to define our identity, national identity again. That's when we started reviving all the traditional rituals, religious celebrations, everything since the 1990s. And even though during those Soviet regime we were oppressed and all the spiritual beliefs were prohibited, today we actually still have a lot of Buddhist rituals and symbolical customs that are infused in our daily life. And we still use the Buddhist astrological horoscope and the system of the 12 year of the animals. And the very common example is that we use the Buddhist horoscope, and on that horoscope there are certain days that we cannot have our hair cut or something like that. So we also look at that horoscope, but it's also up to people. I actually don't mind about that horoscope. I don't care which day I get my hair cut, but many people use that.